When store manager Kevin Richards saw the elderly black woman counting coins at checkout counter 3, he was already reaching for his walkie-talkie. What he didn't expect was to find himself face-to-face with a police detective 30 minutes later, explaining why he'd just humiliated that officer's 72-year-old mother in front of a store full of witnesses. The words that would shatter his career hadn't been spoken yet, but they were coming. Detective Marcus Thompson, Metro Police. That woman you just threw out? That's my mother. The fluorescent lights of Morrison's Market cast their harsh white glow across the polished linoleum floors as Kevin Richards surveyed his domain from behind the customer service counter. It was 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday afternoon, and the upscale grocery chain was experiencing its typical midweek lull. Kevin had been assistant manager for 3 years, and he developed what he called a keen eye for problem customers. The eye that had earned him 2 Employee of the Month awards, 3 commendations for loss prevention, and 1 quiet warning from corporate about his aggressive customer service approach that his district manager had buried in his personnel file. Kevin Richards was 35 years old, 5'10", and carried himself with the territorial confidence of someone who'd found his small kingdom and intended to defend it. His father had managed a hardware store in rural Georgia. His grandfather had run a general store back when customer service meant knowing your place in the community hierarchy. Retail management was in his blood, along with certain assumptions about order, efficiency, and the natural distinction between desirable and undesirable clientele. What Kevin didn't know was that the woman slowly making her way through his carefully organized aisles had spent 43 years teaching 3rd grade in the same school district where she'd once been denied entry as a student. Dorothy Thompson was 72 years old, a retired educator who had raised 4 children alone after her husband died in Vietnam, and she was counting every penny not out of choice, but out of necessity. Her monthly Social Security check of $1,247 had to cover rent, utilities, medication, and groceries, leaving exactly $73 for food each week. Dorothy moved through Morrison's Market with the careful precision of someone who had learned to make every dollar stretch, every decision count. Her worn leather purse contained exactly $23.67 in carefully sorted bills and coins, enough for the week's groceries that would accommodate her diabetic meal plan. She'd spent 20 minutes comparing prices, calculating nutrients per dollar, making choices between wants and needs that no one should have to make in the richest country on earth. The shopping cart she pushed contained the modest essentials of survival on a fixed income. Generic whole wheat bread, store-brand peanut butter, bananas slightly past their prime but marked down 50%, a small package of chicken thighs, frozen vegetables without fancy packaging, and her one weekly indulgence, a small container of vanilla yogurt that reminded her of better times when such choices weren't calculated down to the penny. Kevin watched her approach checkout counter 3 through the security monitor in his office, his experienced eye cataloging everything that bothered him about the situation. Elderly customer moving slowly through the store, obviously price shopping every item, pushing a cart that looked half empty compared to his target demographic. Morrison's Market positioned itself as an upscale alternative to the big box stores, catering to customers who valued quality and convenience over bargain hunting. In Kevin's mind, customers who counted coins at checkout sent the wrong message to his preferred clientele. The afternoon shift was staffed with his most efficient team. Sarah Martinez at checkout 3, a college student who'd been working part-time for 6 months. Mike Chin at customer service, reliable but sometimes too sympathetic to customer complaints. And Janet Williams supervising the floor, a 20-year veteran who'd seen every type of customer interaction imaginable. Kevin prided himself on running a tight operation, maintaining what he called standards that kept Morrison's reputation intact. What Kevin Richards didn't understand was that the woman approaching Sarah's checkout counter had faced down school boards that tried to deny her tenure, parents who questioned whether a black teacher could educate their children, and administrators who assumed her quiet dignity meant she could be overlooked or dismissed. Dorothy Thompson had developed her own keen eye over 7 decades, an eye that could spot prejudice from across a room, distinguish between honest frustration and deliberate humiliation, and recognize when someone was about to make a mistake they'd regret. Dorothy placed her items on the conveyor belt with the same methodical care she'd once used to organize lesson plans, each product positioned to make the checkout process as efficient as possible. She understood the rhythm of retail work, the pressure of quotas and timelines, the way a slow customer could throw off an entire shift's momentum. She'd raised children who worked in service industries, knew the weight of standing on your feet all day, dealing with difficult customers, trying to meet impossible expectations. Sarah Martinez began scanning items with practiced efficiency, her fingers dancing across the register keys with a muscle memory of thousands of transactions. She'd been trained to maintain eye contact, smile genuinely, engage customers in friendly conversation that made shopping feel personal rather than transactional. But something in Dorothy's careful demeanor suggested this wasn't a customer looking for small talk. This was someone focused on a task that carried more weight than a simple grocery run. "Good afternoon," Sarah said warmly, noting the careful organization of items, the way Dorothy had her money already prepared, the quiet dignity in her posture. "How are you doing today?" "I'm well, thank you, dear," Dorothy replied, her voice carrying the measured authority of someone who'd spent decades commanding classroom attention. "I hope your day is going smoothly." The interaction was polite, efficient, exactly what customer service training manuals prescribed. But Kevin Richards was watching through his office monitor, and something about the scene triggered his internal alarm system. The careful counting of money, the modest selection of items, the way Dorothy seemed to be calculating something in her head as each price appeared on the register display. In Kevin's experience, customers who paid with exact change were often the ones who caused problems. They questioned prices, demanded to speak with managers, held up lines while they disputed charges. They were the customers who turned quick transactions into lengthy negotiations, efficiency into chaos, smooth operations into public relations nightmares. Dorothy's total came to exactly $23.67, and she began counting out her payment with the same careful precision she'd used throughout the shopping process. Bills first, a 20, 3 ones. Then coins counted methodically from a small change purse that had served her faithfully for 15 years. 2 quarters, 1 dime, 1 nickel, 2 pennies. Sarah waited patiently, recognizing the careful dignity in Dorothy's movements, understanding without judgment that this transaction represented more than a simple exchange of money for goods. She'd seen enough customers on fixed incomes to know that every penny mattered, every purchase was considered, every dollar spent was a dollar that couldn't be spent on something else equally necessary. But Kevin Richards was already moving from his office toward checkout counter 3. His manager's instincts telling him that a situation was developing that required his intervention. In his mind, he was preventing a problem before it escalated, maintaining the efficiency standards that kept Morrison's market profitable, protecting the customer experience for shoppers who valued speed and convenience over whatever personal drama was unfolding at his checkout counter. He had no way of knowing that the woman counting coins with such careful precision was the mother of Detective Marcus Thompson, a 15-year veteran of the Metro Police Department who was currently finishing paperwork in an unmarked car just 12 blocks away. He couldn't possibly have imagined that his next decision would transform a routine Tuesday afternoon into a viral video, a corporate crisis, and a personal reckoning that would cost him everything he thought he'd built. Dorothy finished counting her money and looked up at Sarah with a smile that had once reassured thousands of nervous third graders on their first day of school. "I believe that's exactly $23.67, she said quietly. Sarah nodded, accepting the payment with the same respectful efficiency she'd shown throughout the transaction. "Perfect. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day." But Kevin Richards was already stepping into the situation, his hand reaching for the walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, his mind made up about what needed to happen next. In his version of customer service, dignity was less important than speed, and understanding was secondary to efficiency. He was about to discover that some mistakes can't be undone with apologies or explanations, and that the woman he was about to humiliate had raised a son who'd sworn an oath to protect and serve, an oath that began with protecting the people he loved most. If you believe every grandparent deserves to be treated with dignity regardless of the color of their skin, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments about a time you witnessed someone stand up to discrimination. Because what happens next will completely change how you see respect, family, and the power of justice. Kevin Richards approached checkout counter 3 with the confident stride of someone who believed he was solving a problem before it became a crisis. His polished black shoes clicked against the linoleum with the rhythm of authority, each step bringing him closer to what he saw as a necessary intervention in the smooth operation of his store. "Is everything all right here?" Kevin asked, his voice carrying the practiced tone of management, friendly enough to avoid seeming aggressive, but firm enough to establish control over the situation. Sarah looked up from where she was beginning to bag Dorothy's groceries, surprise flickering across her face. The transaction had been completely routine, pleasant even. Dorothy's payment was exact, her demeanor courteous. The entire interaction proceeding exactly as customer service training prescribed. "Everything's fine, Mr. Richards," Sarah replied, glancing between her manager and Dorothy with growing confusion. "Mrs. Thompson," Dorothy supplied quietly, sensing the shift in atmosphere, but maintaining her composure with the grace of someone who had navigated far more treacherous social waters. "Dorothy Thompson." Kevin's eyes swept over the modest collection of groceries, the carefully counted money still visible on the counter, the way Dorothy stood with patient dignity despite the obvious interruption to her transaction. Everything about the scene confirmed his initial assessment. A customer who would slow down operations, create inefficiencies, potentially drive away the kind of clientele Morrison's market was designed to attract. "Ma'am, I couldn't help but notice that you seem to be having some difficulty with your payment," Kevin said, his tone carrying the false sympathy of someone who had already decided on a course of action. "If you're having trouble affording your groceries, perhaps Morrison's isn't the right fit for your shopping needs." The words landed in the space between them like a physical blow. Sarah's eyes widened in shock. She'd witnessed the entire transaction, seen Dorothy count out exact change with quiet dignity, watched a perfectly normal customer interaction unfold without a single problem. The suggestion that Dorothy couldn't afford her groceries was not only wrong, it was deliberately insulting. Dorothy felt the familiar sting of discrimination, the particular humiliation of being judged not by her actions, but by assumptions based on her appearance, her age, her careful management of limited resources. She had experienced this treatment before, in restaurants that assumed she couldn't afford the bill, in stores where clerks followed her with suspicious eyes, in countless daily interactions where her dignity was questioned before she even spoke. "Sir, I paid for my groceries in full," Dorothy said calmly, her voice carrying the authority of 4 decades in the classroom. "I don't understand what difficulty you're referring to." Kevin's jaw tightened. In his experience, customers who challenged his assessment were exactly the problem customers he was trying to avoid. Reasonable people accepted management decisions without argument. Difficult customers questioned authority, demanded explanations, turned simple situations into complicated disputes. "Ma'am, I observed you counting coins for several minutes," Kevin continued, his voice growing firmer. "That kind of deliberation can make other customers uncomfortable. Morrison's prides itself on efficient service." Other customers in line were beginning to notice the conversation, heads turning toward checkout counter 3 with the magnetism of conflict. An elderly man, with a full cart 2 positions back, craned his neck to see what was happening. A mother with 2 young children in the express lane paused her phone conversation to listen. Sarah felt her stomach clench with recognition of what was happening. She'd seen Kevin's interventions before, always targeting customers who didn't fit his narrow definition of Morrison's ideal demographic. Always delivered with corporate speak about efficiency and standards, but always landing hardest on people who could least afford to fight back. Dorothy's hands remained steady, but something shifted in her posture, a straightening that spoke of decades spent facing down prejudice with quiet strength. She had not raised 4 children, survived as a widow, built a teaching career in hostile environments, only to be humiliated by a store manager who mistook her careful budgeting for inability to pay. "Young man," Dorothy said, her voice carrying the steel that had once silenced unruly classrooms, "I have been shopping in grocery stores since before you were born. I paid for my items in full, with legal tender, in a completely normal transaction. If you have a problem with customers who count their money carefully, perhaps you should reconsider your career in customer service. The rebuke was delivered with such quiet authority that Kevin felt his cheeks flush. Around them, the growing audience of customers and employees watched with increasing interest, sensing that this was no longer a routine management intervention, but something more significant. Kevin Richards was about to make the decision that would end his career, destroy his reputation, and bring him face to face with a force he never saw coming. Kevin Richards felt his authority being challenged in front of customers and employees, and every instinct he developed in 3 years of management screamed that he needed to reassert control. In his mind, allowing an elderly customer to question his judgment would set a dangerous precedent, undermining the efficiency standards that kept Morrison's market profitable. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step aside so I can speak with my employee," Kevin said, his voice taking on the hard edge of someone who had moved beyond customer service into damage control mode. "Sarah, please suspend this transaction." Sarah's hands froze over the receipt printer, her training warring with her conscience. She'd completed the sale, accepted valid payment, and bagged the groceries according to standard procedure. There was no legitimate reason to suspend a finished transaction, and everyone watching knew it. "Mr. Richards, the sale is complete," Sarah said carefully, glancing between her manager and Dorothy with growing alarm. "Mrs. Thompson paid in full." "I said suspend it," Kevin repeated, his tone making it clear that further discussion would have consequences for Sarah's employment. Dorothy watched this exchange with a horrified recognition of someone who had seen power abused in smaller ways throughout her lifetime. Teachers who targeted certain students, administrators who found excuses to discipline black children more harshly, supervisors who created impossible standards for employees they wanted to eliminate. The pattern was always the same: manufactured problems leading to predetermined solutions. "Sir, what exactly is the issue here?" Dorothy asked, her voice still controlled, but carrying an undertone of steel that had once commanded respect from school board members twice her size. "I've done nothing wrong, said nothing inappropriate, and completed a normal business transaction." Kevin's face flushed deeper. The growing crowd of onlookers was making him feel exposed, judged, pressured to justify decisions that felt increasingly difficult to explain. In his experience, problem customers always tried to make themselves look reasonable while making management look unreasonable. The solution was to end the situation quickly and decisively. "Ma'am, I'm asking you to leave your cart and exit the store," Kevin announced, his voice carrying across the checkout area like a bell tolling judgment. "You're creating a disturbance that's affecting other customers." The words hung in the air like an accusation of guilt for crimes that existed only in Kevin's imagination. Around them, the store fell into the kind of silence that precedes either violence or justice, depending on who has the power to determine which. An elderly white man in line stepped forward slightly, his own sense of decency overriding his discomfort with confrontation. "Excuse me, young man, but I've been watching this entire interaction. This lady hasn't done anything wrong." A mother with her teenage daughter nodded in agreement. "She was just paying for groceries. There's no disturbance here except the one you're creating." But Kevin had passed the point of rational assessment. Surrounded by witnesses, challenged by customers, questioned by his own employee, he felt trapped into a course of action that his pride wouldn't let him abandon. In retail management, backing down from a decision in public was seen as weakness, and weakness led to loss of authority. "Security to checkout 3. Kevin spoke into his walkie-talkie, the crackle of radio static adding an ominous weight to the words. "We need assistance with a customer situation." Dorothy Thompson stood in the fluorescent lighting of Morrison's Market, surrounded by strangers who were beginning to understand they were witnessing something larger than a customer service dispute. This was the moment when ordinary people had to choose between the comfort of silence and the courage of standing up for what was right. What none of them knew was that 12 blocks away, Detective Marcus Thompson was finishing his shift paperwork and looking forward to his weekly phone call with his mother, a conversation that was about to become something very different than either of them expected. Security guard Mike Rodriguez arrived at checkout counter 3 within 90 seconds of Kevin's radio call, his heavy footsteps echoing across the store with the authority of someone trained to handle real emergencies. Mike was a 28-year-old former military police officer who had taken the Morrison's market security position to supplement his income while finishing his criminal justice degree. In 18 months on the job, he dealt with shoplifters, handled medical emergencies, and defused disputes between customers over parking spaces. But he'd never been called to remove an elderly woman for the crime of paying for groceries. "What's the situation?" Mike asked quietly, positioning himself beside Kevin while scanning the scene with professional assessment. His trained eye took in Dorothy's calm demeanor, the completed transaction on the counter, the growing crowd of customers who looked more sympathetic to the elderly woman than supportive of management's intervention. "Disruptive customer," Kevin replied, his voice carrying the false confidence of someone who had committed to a course of action and couldn't find a way to retreat. "She's been holding up the line, arguing with staff, creating problems for other shoppers." Mike's brow furrowed as he looked from Kevin to Dorothy, then to Sarah, who was standing frozen behind the register with Dorothy's bagged groceries still in her hands. Nothing about the scene suggested disruption. No raised voices, no aggressive behavior, no signs of the disturbance Kevin was describing. "Ma'am," Mike said gently, addressing Dorothy with the respectful tone he'd been trained to use with all customers. "Is there some kind of problem I can help resolve?" Dorothy looked at this young security guard and saw something Kevin Richards had missed, the bearing of someone who understood duty, who recognized the difference between authority used for protection and authority used for oppression. In Mike's careful positioning, his respectful tone, his obvious discomfort with the situation, she recognized a man who was trying to do his job while maintaining his conscience. "Officer, I completed a normal grocery transaction," Dorothy explained calmly, her voice carrying the clarity of someone who had spent decades explaining complex concepts to children. "I paid in full, caused no disturbance, and was preparing to leave when the manager decided I was somehow problematic." Mike Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten as he recognized the situation he'd been placed in. His military training had taught him to follow orders, but his experience as a black man in America had taught him to recognize racial profiling when he saw it. The elderly woman standing before him reminded him painfully of his own grandmother, who had faced similar humiliations in stores throughout the Jim Crow South and beyond. "Mr. Richards," Mike said carefully, turning to address Kevin while keeping his voice low enough to avoid escalating the public nature of the confrontation, "what specific policy violation are we addressing here?" Kevin felt trapped between his initial decision and the growing realization that he couldn't articulate a legitimate justification for his actions. The security guard's question demanded specificity that his assumptions couldn't provide. Dorothy had violated no store policies, broken no laws, created no actual disturbance beyond existing in a space where Kevin believed she didn't belong. She's not the kind of customer Morrison serves," Kevin said finally, the words emerging with the desperation of someone who had run out of reasonable explanations. The admission hung in the air like a confession, and the growing crowd of witnesses understood exactly what Kevin had revealed about his motivations. Several customers exchanged glances of recognition and disgust. A teenage girl discreetly activated her phone's camera, sensing that she was witnessing something that needed to be documented. Mike Rodriguez felt his professional composure crack slightly. In 2 tours overseas and 18 months of security work, he'd never been asked to remove someone from a store based purely on management's discomfort with their race and economic status. "Sir," Mike said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who was about to make a decision that could cost him his job, "I don't see any violation that would justify asking this customer to leave." Kevin's face went pale as he realized that his own security guard was refusing to follow his directive. In front of a growing audience of customers, employees, and at least one person recording video, his authority was crumbling completely. "Ma'am," Kevin said, turning back to Dorothy with the desperate aggression of someone whose back was against the wall, "I'm going to have to ask you one final time to leave your groceries and exit the store. If you refuse, I'll be forced to call the police." Dorothy Thompson stood in the harsh fluorescent lighting of Morrison's Market, surrounded by strangers who had become unwilling witnesses to her humiliation, and felt the weight of 7 decades pressing down on her shoulders. She had faced down bigger bullies than Kevin Richards, survived worse injustices than grocery store discrimination, but the accumulation of a lifetime's worth of such moments threatened to break something inside her that had remained strong through everything else. "Young man," Dorothy said quietly, her voice carrying the dignity of someone who refused to be broken by ignorance, "you do what you feel you must do. But understand that my son taught me long ago that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply stand your ground and let the truth speak for itself." What Kevin Richards didn't know was that Dorothy's son was already in his car, heading toward Morrison's Market, and that the truth was about to speak much louder than anyone in that store could possibly imagine. Kevin Richards reached for his cell phone with shaking hands, his threat to call police transforming from bluster into desperate reality. He had painted himself into a corner where backing down would mean admitting he was wrong in front of a store full of witnesses, but moving forward meant involving law enforcement in a situation that even he was beginning to realize had no legal justification. "Sir, please reconsider," Mike Rodriguez said quietly, positioning himself between Kevin and Dorothy in a subtle act of protection. "I've reviewed the situation, and there's no grounds for police involvement. This customer has done nothing wrong." But Kevin was beyond rational thought, trapped by his own pride and the weight of public scrutiny. He dialed 911 with the desperate hope that police authority would somehow validate his increasingly indefensible position. Dorothy Thompson watched this escalation with the weary recognition of someone who had seen such moments before, times when prejudice became so entrenched that people would rather destroy themselves than admit they were wrong. She thought of her son Marcus, somewhere in the city, protecting and serving, and felt a familiar protective instinct not to burden him with her troubles. But as Kevin spoke into his phone, describing a disruptive customer causing problems, Dorothy realized this situation had moved beyond her ability to handle alone. With quiet dignity, she stepped away from the checkout counter and pulled out her own phone, a simple device her son had insisted she carry for emergencies. She hesitated for a moment, thumb hovering over Marcus's contact number. Her boy worked hard, dealt with enough stress in his dangerous job, and she'd raised him with the principle that you handled your own problems when possible. But something about Kevin's vindictive determination, the public nature of her humiliation, and the arrival of police told her this was no longer about groceries or even personal dignity. This was about something larger that required the kind of authority she didn't possess. Dorothy pressed call. 12 blocks away, Detective Marcus Thompson was organizing case files in his unmarked Crown Victoria when his phone buzzed with his mother's ringtone, a jazz melody she'd chosen because it reminded her of dancing with his father before Vietnam took him away. Marcus smiled automatically. Their Tuesday afternoon check-ins were the bright spot of his work week, a reminder of what he was protecting in a job that showed him humanity's worst impulses. "Hey, Mama," Marcus answered warmly, tucking the phone between his ear and shoulder while continuing to sort paperwork. "How's your Tuesday treating you?" "Marcus, honey." Dorothy's voice came through with careful control, but 38 years of being her son had taught him to hear the strain she was trying to hide. "I don't want to bother you at work, but I'm having a situation at Morrison's Market that I think might require your expertise." Marcus stopped organizing files, his police instincts immediately sharpening. His mother was the strongest person he knew, someone who had raised 4 children alone while teaching full-time and completing her master's degree. For her to call during his work hours meant something serious was happening. "What kind of situation, Mama?" Marcus asked, already reaching for his keys. Dorothy glanced around the store, seeing Kevin arguing with 911 dispatch about response time, Mike Rodriguez standing guard beside her with obvious discomfort, and a growing crowd of customers filming what was becoming a viral moment in real time. "The store manager has decided I don't belong here," Dorothy said quietly, her voice carrying decades of experience with such treatment. "He's called police to have me removed for paying for groceries while black, and I think this might be something you need to see for yourself." Marcus Thompson felt something cold and familiar settle in his chest, the protective rage that came when someone threatened his family, combined with the professional assessment that comes from 15 years of investigating crimes. His mother wasn't dramatic, didn't exaggerate, and if she was calling for help, the situation was exactly as serious as her calm voice suggested. "Mama, stay exactly where you are," Marcus said, already starting his engine. "Don't leave, don't argue, don't do anything that could escalate the situation. I'm 12 minutes away." "I'll be right here," Dorothy replied, ending the call with the quiet confidence of someone who had just activated a force that would change everything. 8 minutes after Dorothy's phone call, 2 patrol officers arrived at Morrison's Market with the weary efficiency of public servants, responding to what dispatch had categorized as a customer disturbance. Officers Jennifer Walsh and David Kim had worked this district for 3 years and had learned to approach such calls with professional skepticism. Retail managers often used police as enforcement tools for problems that had nothing to do with actual law violations. Officer Walsh, a 12-year veteran with sharp instincts for reading situations, immediately assessed the scene through the store's front windows. An elderly black woman standing calmly near a checkout counter, surrounded by concerned customers and a security guard who looked deeply uncomfortable. A flustered store manager pacing behind the customer service desk. Multiple people with phones out, clearly recording whatever was unfolding. "This doesn't look like a disturbance," Officer Kim murmured to his partner as they approached the entrance. "Looks like a public relations disaster." Inside the store, Kevin Richards felt a surge of vindication as the patrol car pulled into the parking lot. Finally, real authority was arriving to validate his position, to remove the problem customer who had turned his efficient Tuesday afternoon into a circus of challenges to his management. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly," Kevin said, approaching Walsh and Kim with the eager desperation of someone who believed salvation was walking through his door. "I need this customer removed for causing a disturbance and refusing to leave when asked." Officer Walsh's trained eye swept the scene again, noting Dorothy's calm posture, the completed transaction still visible on the checkout counter, and the obvious sympathy of the witnesses. In 12 years of police work, she developed a reliable instinct for distinguishing actual problems from manufactured ones. "Ma'am," Officer Walsh said, addressing Dorothy with professional courtesy, "I'm Officer Walsh. Can you tell me what's happening here?" Dorothy Thompson looked at this young policewoman and saw someone trying to do her job fairly despite being called into an obviously problematic situation. She had raised children to respect law enforcement while understanding that individual officers varied widely in their commitment to justice. "Officer, I completed a grocery transaction, paid in full, and was preparing to leave when the manager decided I was somehow undesirable," Dorothy explained calmly. "He's insisted I leave my paid-for groceries and exit the store, though I violated no laws and caused no actual disturbance." Officer Kim examined the receipt and payment evidence still visible on the counter, noting the exact change and completed transaction. His police training had taught him to follow evidence rather than accusations, and the evidence showed a perfectly normal retail interaction. "Mr. Richards," Officer Walsh said, turning to Kevin with the patient tone of someone who had dealt with many such situations, "what specific law or policy has this customer violated?" Kevin felt his moment of vindication crumbling as he faced the same question Mike Rodriguez had asked earlier. The police officers weren't automatically taking his side, weren't immediately removing Dorothy, weren't validating his authority the way he'd expected. She doesn't fit our customer demographic," Kevin said weakly, the words sounding even more pathetic when spoken to sworn law enforcement officers. Officer Walsh exchanged a look with her partner, both recognizing they'd been called to waste taxpayer resources on a store manager's personal prejudices. In their combined 15 years of police work, they'd seen this pattern before. Business owners using law enforcement to enforce social hierarchies that had nothing to do with actual crimes. "Sir, that's not a police matter," Officer Kim said firmly. "If a customer has paid for merchandise and isn't violating any laws, we can't compel them to leave." But as the officers prepared to de-escalate the situation and leave Kevin to deal with his own poor decisions, Detective Marcus Thompson's unmarked Crown Victoria pulled into the Morrison's Market parking lot. He stepped out of his vehicle with the controlled urgency of someone who had spent the 12-minute drive preparing for whatever he might find. Marcus Thompson was 6 feet tall, built like the former college linebacker he'd been, and carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who had earned respect through 15 years of distinguished service. He wore a navy blue polo shirt and khakis, off-duty attire that concealed the badge and service weapon that made him one of the city's most decorated detectives. As he walked through Morrison's Market's automatic doors, Marcus's trained eye immediately cataloged the scene. 2 patrol officers, a nervous store manager, his mother standing with dignified composure near a checkout counter, and a crowd of witnesses who had turned a grocery store into an amphitheater of justice. Kevin Richards looked at this new arrival, another black man entering his store during an already problematic situation, and felt his frustration reach a breaking point. In his mind, the situation was spiraling completely out of control, with more complications arriving by the minute. What Kevin didn't realize was that he was about to meet the force that would end his career, expose his prejudices to the world, and teach him that some mistakes carry consequences far beyond anything he could imagine. Marcus Thompson moved through Morrison's Market with the measured pace of someone assessing a crime scene, his trained eye cataloging every detail, while his protective instincts focused entirely on his mother's safety. He could see Dorothy standing near checkout counter 3 with a quiet dignity he'd inherited from her, surrounded by patrol officers who appeared to be handling the situation professionally. "Excuse me," Marcus said, approaching the group with calm authority. "I'm here about the incident involving Mrs. Thompson." Kevin Richards turned toward this new voice and felt his frustration reach a breaking point. Another black man entering his store during an already impossible situation, probably another family member or friend ready to turn his management decision into a community uprising. In Kevin's mind, he was now facing a coordinated effort to undermine his authority. "Sir, this is a private matter between Morrison's Market and a customer," Kevin said, his voice carrying the brittle edge of someone who had moved far beyond rational thought. "I'm going to need you to leave the store immediately." Officer Walsh looked up from her notes, recognizing something in the newcomer's bearing that Kevin had completely missed. 15 years of police work had taught her to identify law enforcement officers even out of uniform. The way they moved, positioned themselves, assessed situations with professional detachment. "And you are?" Officer Walsh asked Marcus, her tone carrying the courteous respect of one professional addressing another. Marcus reached slowly into his wallet, his movements deliberate and visible to everyone watching. What he pulled out wasn't a driver's license or credit card, but a leather badge holder that he opened with the practiced motion of someone who had done so thousands of times before. "Detective Marcus Thompson, Metro Police Department," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone whose rank commanded immediate respect. "And the woman you've been harassing for the past 30 minutes? That's my mother." The words hit the assembled crowd like a physical shockwave. Kevin Richards felt his knees go weak as the full implications crashed over him. The elderly woman he'd humiliated, threatened, and tried to have arrested was the mother of a police detective. The customer disturbance he'd reported was actually him discriminating against a cop's family member in front of multiple witnesses. Officer Walsh straightened to attention, recognizing Marcus's name and reputation. Detective Thompson was well known throughout the department as one of their most decorated investigators, a 15-year veteran with commendations for valor and a spotless record of community service. "Detective Thompson," Officer Walsh said respectfully, "we responded to a customer disturbance call, but upon investigation, there appears to be no violation of law by your mother. The store manager seems to have personal issues with Mrs. Thompson's presence." Marcus looked at Kevin Richards with a cold assessment of someone who had spent 15 years investigating people who abused their power over others. He'd seen this pattern before, authority figures who used their positions to humiliate people they considered beneath them. Bullies who hid behind corporate policies and management titles. "Personal issues," Marcus repeated, his voice carrying the controlled anger of someone who had just watched his mother be publicly degraded. "Is that what we're calling racial discrimination now?" Kevin's face went ashen as he realized that every word of the past 30 minutes had been witnessed not just by customers and employees, but by a decorated police detective who now had personal motivation to ensure justice was served. "Detective, I didn't know." Kevin stammered. His earlier confidence completely evaporated. You didn't know what? Marcus asked, stepping closer with the controlled intensity of someone who had interrogated dangerous criminals. You didn't know that elderly black women deserve the same respect as any other customer? You didn't know that discrimination based on race is illegal? Or you didn't know that someday you might face consequences for your prejudice? The store fell completely silent except for the hum of refrigeration units and the soft sound of multiple phones, recording what had become a masterclass in accountability. Kevin Richards stood facing a decorated detective whose mother he had just humiliated, surrounded by witnesses, with his career and reputation crumbling in real time. If this moment is giving you chills like it's giving me, smash that subscribe button and drop a comment about a grandparent in your life who deserves nothing but respect. Because what happens next will show you the true power of standing up for family. Dorothy Thompson watched her son transform from concerned family member into the police detective who had earned respect throughout the city, and felt a complex mix of pride and sorrow. Pride in the man he'd become, sorrow that her humiliation had required his intervention to be taken seriously. Marcus Thompson looked at Kevin Richards with the steady gaze of someone who had just witnessed his mother's dignity trampled by ignorance and prejudice. Here's what's going to happen, Marcus said quietly, his detective's authority filling the space between them. You're going to apologize to my mother. You're going to complete her transaction with the respect she deserved from the beginning. And then you're going to explain to your corporate office why a decorated police detective's mother was humiliated in your store. Kevin nodded frantically, his career flashing before his eyes. Yes, sir. I'm so sorry, Mrs. Thompson. This was a terrible mistake. Dorothy Thompson looked at this young man who had learned his lesson too late and saw not an enemy, but someone who might still become better. I accept your apology, Mr. Richards. I hope you'll remember this moment the next time you're tempted to judge someone by their appearance. Within 48 hours, Kevin Richards was terminated. The viral video reached 2 million views. Morrison's market implemented company-wide sensitivity training. But the real change was personal. Marcus hugged his mother in that store and realized that protecting the people you love sometimes means using whatever power you have to defend their dignity. Dorothy continued shopping at Morrison's Market, where she was treated with the respect she'd always deserved. And Kevin Richards? He took a job at a community center, working with elderly residents, learning what respect really meant. If this story changed how you think about respect, family, and standing up for those we love, subscribe for more stories that show the extraordinary power of ordinary people defending what's right. Comment below about an elderly person in your life who deserves to be treated like royalty. And share this video because everyone needs to see what real family loyalty looks like. Detective Marcus Thompson's story proves that badges don't make heroes. Heroes are made by people who refuse to let their loved ones be mistreated. Remember, you never know who someone's child might be, so treat everyone's parent like they could be your own. Until next time, keep looking for the heroes who use their power for protection. And remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up for the people you love.